You're listening to the best of the bravest. Interviews with the FDNY's elite. "83 volumes of this thing is crazy, in a good way, of course. It started with Ray Seeley a few years ago, and I'm thinking 2021, so not even a few years ago, 5 years ago, Best of the Bravest started. Here we are, 82 volumes later. We're closing in on 100 volumes of this mini-series alone. Almost 400 episodes of this show. The next one will be 400, and that'll be a major milestone for us. We look forward to that one. But welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another installation of the Best of the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. Again, I look at the mini-series of this program and really the backbones that I would say, and this is no disrespect to the other ones that we have, certainly Tales from the Boom Room, which profiles retired members of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squads, respectively. Our mini-series on the NYPD Emergency Service Unit, the E-Men, is another one. And then certainly this one. And it's great that you guys keep coming back, and it's great that we're able to continue to turn out the guests like tonight's guests that are willing to, make time for Mike the New Haven and talk about what they did along the way. I'll intro him in a moment. For those of you that watch Getting Salty, you just saw him, and most of my audience is, of course, viewers of that program as well. So you saw him there, you'll see him here, but you're going to see him after we run the next couple of ads, and that is going to be first and foremost Granite State. Hey there, firefighters and fire buffs. If you're tuning in to the Mike the New Haven podcast, you know the value of reliable gear. At Granite State Fire Helmets, we're proud to introduce the TL2, our premium leather Phoenix fire helmet. The TL2 is all about comfort, durability, and that timeless style you trust. And here's the best part. All in-stock inventory usually ships within 24 hours, so you'll have it in your hands in no time. Plus, our company is proudly owned and operated by firemen, so you know we've got your back and understand exactly what you need out there on the front lines. So don't wait. Gear up with the TL2 today. Granite State Fire Helmets, where tradition meets innovation, and where firemen have you covered. And the other ad that we'll run, actually, you know what? Again, baseball season is upon us. Pitchers and catchers just reported. Producer Victor's podcast, The Chop Seat. Baseball fans, if you bleed Braves country red and blue, this one's for you. Check out The Chop Seat podcast hosted by Victor Mignetis. Every week, Victor dives deep into all things Atlanta Braves and Major League Baseball, from game recaps and trade rumors to player spotlights and the latest league news. Whether it's breaking down the lineup, debating pitching rotations, or talking postseason chances, the Chop Seat gives you honest takes, sharp analysis, and a fan's true passion for the game. So if you're looking for your go-to Braves and MLB podcast, pull up a chair and join the conversation. Subscribe to the Chop Seat today on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Because in Braves country, there's always room at the Chop Seat. My buddy James Hilton's in the chat. He works AMR in New Haven and hopefully becomes a fireman pretty soon. I know he's on the list. To my buddy James, I miss you, buddy, at AMR. I miss a lot of people at AMR. Hopefully I can come back in a part-time capacity in the near future. It'd be great. I'm doing dispatch now, as you guys know. But I loved working the field, man. And that's a good, even though my ambition is still very much to become a career firefighter myself, working EMS is a good starting point. Taught me a lot. So miss seeing you around AMR, miss seeing you down at the hospitals, my friend. I hope all's well. Sorry about your Patriots losing the other day in the Super Bowl, or am I? Anyway, my next guest is a veteran FDNY chief whose career spans engine, ladder, rescue squad, division, and bureau level command, with leadership roles that touch nearly every operational layer of the New York City Fire Department. He worked in busy Brooklyn companies, also did rescue operations, in which we'll talk about, of course, division command, and ultimately chief of fire prevention, which is an interesting component of his work in the FDNY across his 37 years that we'll be especially diving into. And this is a pathway really that reflects both fireground credibility as well as administrative responsibility. And there's more of that the higher up in rank that you go. He did 37 years from 86 to 2023. And that for this volume 83 of the Best of the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. Like I said, you saw him on Getting Salty. Tonight, you see him on Mike the New Haven. Retired FDNY Deputy Chief Joe Jardin. Chief, we've talked about doing this for a while, so it's nice to finally get the chance to do this. Welcome.
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. And you didn't let me know that there was going to be a Atlanta Braves ad preceding me. That might have rethought it. But let's just correct the time frame. 85, and I just retired in 25.
Oh, 85 to 25. Doc, you saw 5 points for that one. So 40 years. 40
close
years.
to 40. I didn't quite eke it out. But, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm I digest your your content, and you do a great job. Like I told you on the boat that day, I think you do a wonderful job with your interviews, and
Thank you.
very impressed.
All right, thank you very much. Again, listen, we can end the show right there. No, I'm just kidding. So before we get into you getting on the job, I don't have to ask you where your love of the job came from because you were a volunteer for a hot minute. So just take me through growing up and, of course, the exposure to the job for those that didn't hear you previously, and where that began and how that shaped your pathway.
Yeah, as it turned out, my father's stepfather was a volunteer on Long Island, and that led my father into it upon his return from military service. And he got the bug a little later in life. He got on the job when he was almost 34, almost the cutoff for getting hired. He had a passion for the job. Was a volunteer instructor on Long Island, taught for the Suffolk County Fire Academy. Was a volunteer fire chief himself. Got me interested in it. I got involved at the age of 16, became very active when I went to college. I was in an engineering program at the University of Maryland, fire protection engineering, which allowed me the opportunity, along with 11 others each year, to live in a firehouse on campus, part of the Prince George's County combination fire department. And so that certainly whetted my continued interest in being a part of the fire service. So that's what kind of, propelled me, as you say, into a career within the fire service. I was, thought I was going to graduate as an engineer, go on to a career in fire protection engineering. And, I probably would still be doing that. I think a fellow that I was roommates with in what we call the SAC room at the College Park Volunteer Fire Department, Dan Troxel, who had a great over 40-year career with the Washington, D.C. Fire Department, just retired this past summer with over 40 years as a captain, and a well-respected captain in D.C. So he convinced me, thank goodness, when I asked him, Dan, why are we going to be firemen? We're going to be engineers. And he said, no, let's go take the test, and thankfully he dragged me to do that.
Another one of your old friends who ended up becoming a Cleveland police officer, Victor Hayes, is in the chat. He says, "Hey Joe, we were at
college."
Do you know?
Yeah, Victor. Oh, Victor was great. Yeah, Victor was great. Victor Hayes. Yep.
We were part of SAC in 1979.
Even kill guy. I haven't seen Victor Price since he left in 80 or 81. Yeah, golly.
Yeah, he says you went back to Cleveland and ended up joining the Cleveland Police Department, and it's good seeing you. Victor, I don't know which district if you worked in Cleveland, but there's a couple Cleveland guys I'm trying to get on. If you talk to George Soroka at all, who I remember seeing in an episode of Cops, let him know I'm looking for him, and you got my email and my number in the chat, so hit me up, Victor. I'd love to get in touch with him, and who was the other guy I'm looking for? Mark Teskar as well, if you can. So I appreciate you, and thanks for all you. And if you want to come on the show, Vic, let me know, because for those of you that don't know, 90s episodes of Cops, Cleveland was heavily featured. Those episodes are classics. So getting back to you, one thing you mentioned too that I found hilarious in a good way is that, and this is really cool about the volunteers, is that you responded, and you were amongst one of two students, I believe, that could do this. You responded to fire sometimes from high school.
Oh, well, in high school, yeah, I don't know if it's the norm any longer, but kind of crazy when you think about it. But when we turned 16, we could join the volunteer fire department in the town of Hauppauge, where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And yeah, when the siren, and that's how you were notified, right? By the siren blasting, you could leave school, and we would literally run across the schoolyard, hop over the fence through the backyard of the grounds of the Hauppauge Fire Department. And we were the staffing during the day, the handful of students that volunteered.
So, of course, it's already in your blood. And then there comes a point in time where you take the test, you get called to the FDNY, and it's not, as easy from the standpoint that, yes, you have the foundational knowledge, but there's always learning things how to do in terms of how to do it, of course, the FDNY way. And academy wasn't long back then, I think. I remember Chief Sudnick saying for his class, it was only 6 weeks and you were in the firehouse. How long was your academy? And even though if it was briefer than what it is now, tell me about the strenuous nature of, well, like I said, learning how to do things the New York City Fire Department way.
Yeah, you're spot on, right? Even though at that point, I was 24. It was December of 1985. Had 8 years, almost 8 years in the fire service. Yeah, you have to, bring your game up another notch, because you're doing it the FDNY way, right? I mean, and it was something that I took from being in College Park. College Park Fire Department brought together students, a lot of students, right? Mostly students from all over the country, largely from the Northeast, from New York and Pennsylvania and Maryland and Cleveland, right? But when you got there, they told you, you know what? We know you all know something, but learn this way, right? We don't want you to come at us with, well, this is what we do back in, back in Peoria or back in Bucks County or back in Hauppauge. This is how we do it. And when you understand that and you get proficient in it, and you think you can, further evolve the organization, then you have a voice and you can help, right? And it was sort of the same thing, right? Even though I thought I knew some things, there was certainly a lot to learn, and yeah, FDNY did things a little different than I was used to in many aspects, but in many aspects it was the same, right? Make a push, put water on the fire, and the bad things might not happen, right? So at its core, it's firefighting, right? But
Right.
you're right, the types of equipment slightly different, the procedures slightly different, throwing ladders slightly. So yeah, you had to learn the FDNY way, but yeah, it was rigorous, right? Wasn't the Army, right? And I'm not going to compare it to being in the military, but yeah, be on time, be squared away, uh, have your uniform squared away, and yeah, and gain the respect, right, of your colleagues in Proby School, as well as the staff that are looking to impart good information to help you get through your career.
So you get out onto the street, and your first stop is, and correct me if I'm wrong, 210 engine over in Brooklyn. And again, borough to borough, what you have to realize about the New York City Fire Department is, and for those of you that are in the audience, most of you understand this for sure, is it's essentially five fire departments merged into one, because New York City is five cities merged into one. So borough to borough, it's different. And even within the borough, house to house, it's different. Those 2 years before you ended up going to Jackson Heights, which we'll touch on momentarily, tell me about the fire duty. And again, as always, you get senior guys that even if they don't tell you directly, just by how they carry themselves, they teach you a lot. What was it like to absorb the knowledge from those guys? And tell me about what stands out response wise from that 2 year period in 210.
Yeah, so you're right. 210, engine 210, located in the Fort Greene section of Brooklyn at that time. Got to the firehouse in early February of '86. High crime area. I think the precinct was the NYPD precinct might have been leading statistically in gun crimes or something related to that. But it wasn't the busiest neighborhood in terms of fire duty, right? We were bordered by Bed-Stuy, right? Williamsburg not far, Bushwick not far, but we'd listened to more fires probably than we responded to. However, that said, we did our fair share. There was also the opportunity to get relocated when those companies were at work and then go to work in those neighborhoods. So while it wasn't, the busiest engine company in Brooklyn, certainly we did our best to be prepared to go to work, and we had it was because it wasn't the busiest. The dynamic was that if somebody came there and was looking to be more active, they would do their 1, 2, or 3 years until they can find a location, a busier unit, whether it was in Brooklyn, Manhattan, wherever, and make a move. And so it was a very fluid roster, so to speak. But a constant was the young guys were motivated and were always by the back step of the rig, going over equipment, going over procedures, how to conduct a foam operation, how to use the equipment we had, right? And it was a constant. The probie that got there before me, Lincoln Quape, who I would then eventually work with in Rescue 2 years later, he preceded me, and he was a very motivated individual when it came to training and talking fire. And then I had a group of fellows who came in the Proby class after me, Jimmy Schwicke, Jimmy Gersbeck, Larry O'Donnell, Danny Coyle. I think three, except for Danny, went to Sheffield Avenue, right? So that group was a very motivated group. And, that slug of motivated individuals, we were preceded by others who made their way to St. John's East or to Sheffield Avenue or to Rogers Avenue and did work. So that was kind of the dynamic of 210. But eye-opening to me was, yeah, the big difference, right? Being a volunteer, whether it was on Long Island, down in College Park, Maryland, and now being a career firefighter and dealing with, not only, the fire duty and the differences, but also this is your job, right? This is your career, the administrative elements of it, and and what I was really impressed by, even though we weren't the busiest company, the officers we had really cared about us as individuals. We weren't just employees, rather, we were, we were their responsibility, right? And they took that seriously. Made sure we, played by the rules and followed all the regulations, but made sure also that all our personnel needs were taken care of and that all the paperwork and everything was done to our benefit and benefit us. And that was the first stop where, what would become a constant throughout my career was, I would come to realize that the caliber and character of the individual who was a New York City firefighter was well above average, right? And that would just be a constant throughout my career, that you were dealing with people who were just probably not only probably but were pillars in their community besides being great people, right, in the firehouse, and obviously willing to sacrifice for the benefit of others, but just real good people.
Absolutely. We're talking with Joe Jardin, retired FDNY Deputy Chief, veteran of nearly 40 years of the New York City Fire Department. This is volume 83 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. And for those of you, of course, in the chat, if there's any questions, make sure that you leave them. And I see some of them in the chat already. I'll get to them at the appropriate time. But just to move to this portion now, where you learn a little bit. It's not like you got no work at all in 210. It wasn't as busy compared to other companies. There were some moments.
And we had good work, right? We did.
Right.
And I don't want to cut you, but we did. You asked me what was unique about it, and what I did there more so than probably other places in my career was project work, right? We had, 6-story, 14-story and taller New York City Housing Authority projects right down the block and right around the corner. And so we did a fair amount of work in that type of building and occupancy, more so than I would see going forward, right? So that was something that was unique, and so we did work. I don't want to downplay that we didn't do any work. I mean, but we weren't doing the work that some of the companies in certainly other parts of Brooklyn and other parts of the city were doing at that time.
Absolutely. And that brings us over into really the fall of 88. You go to 154 truck. Now, at this point, people talk a lot about the Bronx and Brooklyn in terms of fire duty, but I feel like Queens often gets underrated in that because there's plenty of spots in Queens that burn. I don't know. You can explain it better, of course, than I could. I don't know what the makeup of 154 was in terms of its first due at that time and call volume wise, but you ended up spending 7 years there before you got the rescue in the fall of 95. So tell me about, again, the makeup of that neighborhood compared to what you had in 210 and the type of fire duty you were able to do, especially now being in a truck company.
Yeah. So certainly culture change, not from the firehouse necessarily, and the and the circus character, so to speak, right? The individuals, right? Same clowns, different circus, but
right.
But 210 engine, right? We were a single engine surrounded by both single engines and engines in houses with ladders, and if you went 5 or 6 blocks, you could get beat into your first due if you weren't on your game. You go to a ladder company in Northern Queens at that point, ladder 154. Not as many ladder companies surrounding you. So you could be first due, and you could be on a ticket first due, yet have to travel 3 different highways before you got to the scene, right? And if there was another fire incident going on, we might be the only truck north of the Long Island Expressway in the 14th Division going, first due to a fire. So a lot different, right? Longer travel periods, but in terms of the makeup of the area, you had a good mix. We had a lot more nearby 6-story H-type multiple dwellings, new law apartment buildings, a lot of taxpayers, pretty typical, to the city in general, but more so to Queens than the type we saw in my response area in 210. We had an airport, right? We were, arguably first or second due to LaGuardia Airport, and and we could talk about, Flight 5050, right? I think it was called, or was it? Yeah, Flight 5050 on runway 13. Was that what it was?
Is that
But,
92?
yeah, 92, right? I
Yeah.
guess it was, right? That I was on duty, along with Lieutenant Buckeye, Scotty Maxwell, and several others, right? But so we had that. We had Rikers Island we responded to. That was unique. We did have in Brooklyn a house of detention not too far that we would respond to for automatic fire alarms, but we never did any work in. I think we got over to Rikers Island several times for minor incidents, but never. So it was an interesting response area. We ran in with good companies, as you talked to. In Northern Queens, you had, we were there, ladder 136, ladder 138, 117 was doing work, and, we were kind of in the middle of all that. We would be either first due or second due to those companies. So, yeah, really good experience. And again, just like is a constant throughout my career, I was fortunate to land in a place with people that made me better, right? That I could learn from and grow from, and just a really good part of the process.
And what I like about a lot of the places, and this isn't a knock about the other boroughs, but Queens, I feel like it's a more diverse borough in terms of what you can get and what you can see. So, in terms of where you were at, it feels like you had a good mix of different types of boxes, different types of incidents you can go to. And the more of that you have, the more experience and squared away it makes you as a truckie, especially given what would come later when you transition to the rescue in the mid 90s, which we'll touch on in a little bit. So, in terms of fires that stand out from that time period in your career where you're really starting to find your footing, what to me, or what to you, I should say, sticks out afterwards where you found yourself saying, man, that was something, that was a good box?
And I said this on Getting Salty. In terms of the fires, not many of them stand out, sadly, over that career. I don't have that focused or really good memory.
Mhm.
I remember, I remember some incidents and certainly many things. I'll talk about a couple jobs that I wasn't at that were certainly learning opportunities and impacted how I would, negotiate like my career from that point on. But we did some good work in frame buildings and private dwellings and first job, and I can't tell you what the address, but a fire in a 6-story multiple dwelling in H type, right, new law apartment. So these are big, area buildings with multiple wings, many fire escapes on, could be two or maybe four sides of the building. And as an outside vent firefighter, right, your role is to first do get to the location of the fire from the exterior, right? So if it was a private dwelling, probably involved ground ladders, big multiple dwelling, you would look to find the correct fire escape, make your way up to the fire escape, coordinate ventilation with the inside team, and if needed, enter and search the apartment. And that was especially from somebody coming from an engine where you were on the line, right? And you followed the boss and you went where you were told. It was pretty, you had to be on your game, but it didn't require the decision making. And you're on your own now, right? It's the first time here I am as a firefighter, not with the officer on the interior, but on your own, trying to make decisions from the cues you're receiving, from the radio reports, from the chatter from the inside team on their handy talkies and what you see on the outside. And that's kind of a confusing, challenging position for an OV because it's not always clear, right? And I can guarantee you that the first time I had that position, and this is a memory, I took the wrong fire escape, right? I thought, okay, the fire was in whatever, the run of apartments, and I was off by one, right?
Mm.
But a couple incidents to stand out was certainly that plane crash, and I saw somebody, on the chat. Yeah, it was in
Yep.
it was in 89, right? So the one I'm talking about, I was in 89, US Air 5050. I think it was runway 13, right? And it ended up in the bay, broken in two pieces, it looked like, and just kind of a surreal moment, right? Here we are, how many times we would go to the airport for crash boxes, right? Those were automatic second alarms when that quote crash box came in, and you would go and you would stage at a specified area, and Port Authority PD would lead you into the active runways, and most often you'd stage, we'd find out we weren't needed and we turn around, but this was legit, right? And it was a cold, it was dark out, and you're looking at this scene out of a movie, right? Of a plane in the bay, and we're there pretty quick, right? I think we were, if not the first, second arriving ladder, and Lieutenant Buckite, pretty, pretty good thinker, right? Pretty strategic thinker. He recognized early on that we needed to assist with getting access for responders to assist trapped passengers and an egress mechanism for those passengers. So we deployed a portable ladder to the rear of the aircraft, and you put up that picture in the rear. You can see that ladder that we put in place, and he had us in an effort to forestall potential sinking of that rear part of that aircraft. We actually put a rope around the bottom and rigged it to the pier in an effort to slow down, right, the descent into the water, into any further depth of the back of the plane. And there were plenty of people that we assisted up and off of that ladder, right? So I'll always remember the civilians, right, all the passengers who had come up, many businessmen in their suits that were wet, carrying their briefcases, right? And so it was an impact. We made an impact, and you felt satisfied, right, making an impact at that. But yeah, 154 was a great place. We did a fair amount of work back then. Pull boxes were still a thing, and we were doing probably 6,000 runs a year, rewinding many pull boxes on a regular basis. So we were constantly on the go, but we did a fair amount of fire duty as well.
Absolutely. And the two incidents that Chris Ebden, who was working New York City EMS back then when it was separate from the FDNY, highlighted: 89 for US Air 5050, which left 2 dead and injured 21, and then 92, which was a shining moment for Chief Downey, by the way, who spearheaded that one, as I recall correctly. US Air 405, rather, Fokker F-28, MCI at LaGuardia, 27 killed and 21 injured in that one, which came 3 years later. So definitely emergencies like that prepare you quite well for what would come down the pike. And what's interesting now is that brings us to the fall of 95, and you get to Rescue 2. This is Jay Fischler's Rescue 2. Downey had been there as a captain from 1980 to 1994, held down the fort for 14 years, really put a stamp on the place. Fischler is a year into things as a captain. He ended up making battalion chief in 1998. And what's interesting about his tenure is a lot of people point to Captain Ruvelo's tenure, which was a great tenure, and Captain Downey's tenure before he became Chief Downey. Fischler sometimes gets underrated in that time period. So there's always the interview. So tell me about first the interview, if it was with him, and then, of course, getting the nod to come into, quite frankly, a company that had a legendary reputation, and at that time, a lot of legends working at it.
Yeah, no, it was, yeah, it was a positive I have a positive memory. I went to see Captain Fischler, kind of knew him through his brother. Dave Fischler was a fire marshal, the chief fire marshal in Suffolk County. My father happened to be the commissioner of fire rescue and emergency services at the time out there. So they worked together. So he facilitated an introduction through Dave, and I still stay in contact with Dave and Jay today. But yeah, I went to see Jay, and it was a positive discussion. I don't remember the details of it, but he was frank in letting me know that he's got a list, and he thinks I would be of value to the company, but there are a number of individuals on the list in front of me, and we'll wait. He didn't give me a time frame, but and I can't tell. I don't remember when I went to see him, but what happens in the interim of me, doing that interview with him, and then getting the call to come there in October of '85 was. So I don't know if you interviewed him yet. You certainly know he is John Hodgins, right? The recent
He's been on the show,
Jack
yes.
Hodgins, the recent
Yeah.
retired chief of department. Well, his father was a staff chief with FDNY, had been the chief of fire prevention, and back when I was with 210, being a fire protection engineer, I had met go back to 86, the chief of fire prevention, a guy named Joe DeMeo. And he asked me if I would come work on special projects on my days off, which I did. And so I got to know a lot of really good people, learn a lot of interesting things. And one of the fellows I did work for and projects for was Jack's father, John, right, who would retire as a 3-star. However, when we get to my story a little bit later, here was a guy who was the chief of fire prevention who ran into a political issue, who was removed and put into the citywide tour commander role. At that time, the leadership of the department, and don't ask me who the commissioner was, I don't remember, but, and this was 85-ish, right? 84, 85. They had changed the command structure a bit and did away with borough commands for a short time and implemented division commands in a different way than we think about division commanders today. And what they did was they implemented 24/7 citywide tour commanders. And so they would have a staff chief, 2 or 3-star staff chief on duty for 24 hours, ready to respond to third alarms or greater, big emergencies, multiple 1045 code 1s, right? So deceased individuals, fire victims. And so what happened was Chief Hodgins, then the dad, he needed a full duty aide, and he didn't have one. He was from Staten Island, and he asked me to do him a favor and be his aide till he could locate somebody to do it full time who lived closer to him in Staten Island. And so I agreed. And so what I find out after Chief Fischler, or Captain Fischler at the time, takes me is that I might have been able to go a little sooner, but he couldn't take me from driving a staff chief right to rescue 2. How would that look, right?
Right.
So fair game. So I went back to, I got to go back to the firehouse. He finds an aide, and then in October, I go to rescue 2.
And again, it was a great breeding ground for what would come later and make you, again, you talked about becoming well-rounded, and that certainly came from the time spent at 210, certainly came, of course, to a grander degree in terms of call volume at 154. But the rescue, and they refer to it as Rescue 2, and this is no knock to our other friends in the other rescues, they pick up the phone at Rescue 2, the rescue. So again, his reputation precedes itself because of the pride in terms of the guys that are working there. Now, before I get to the work, you weren't there too long when tragedy struck in February of '96 when Louis Valentino got killed, and the 30th anniversary of that just passed. Unfortunately, I don't know how well you knew Louis prior to getting to Rescue 2, but just being there for a couple months and then a devastating blow like that, what was it like to have to come to terms with something like that, especially being a new guy at the company?
Well, yeah. Let me just start, right? I mean, the guys there, as intimidating as one might think it would be walking into kitchen of rescue too for the first time, and it was indeed. They couldn't, most of the members couldn't be more welcoming and more. I got my shoes broken a little bit because I hadn't gotten somebody from Queens in a while, right? So I had to, navigate that. But I mean, everybody was so welcoming, and two of the names that come, to the fore immediately is Louis Valentino. Just a big smile, big handshake, a welcome. You're going to do great. And Terry Coyle. I don't know if you've ever met or know Terry Coyle. Terry, just a great firefighter, and unfortunately ended his career a little early when he was involved in a collapse. Terry stays active with the counseling services unit, and he's a peer counselor, and so he's still contributing to the job. But everybody was welcoming, and great, and yeah. So you're right. We're there, up in the game training wise, because now you have this. Yeah, this toolbox on wheels. You probably have heard that term before,
Oh
right?
yeah.
With all these tools that you really haven't seen or touched or utilized before. So big learning curve. The positive there was that before I'm there in October, and I come there with a handful of other guys. Tommy Donnelly retires Lieutenant Rescue 1. Billy Esposito comes from Ladder 124. Who else? Jimmy Jaggett comes from 26 Truck, and I'm probably forgetting somebody. But and prior to us, Stan Brzezinski, Mark Gregory come. Mike Quinn is there, I think, a little before them. Eddie Roll. So just this crop of big turnover because of a promotional exam, right? And really,
Right.
Bunch of really good guys get promoted to lieutenant and create some opportunities for others of us. And so we're all in the game together, right? At the rig when nothing else is going on. If not at the rig, in the kitchen with some box or some toolbox open, going over the equipment, going over operations. Combined effort for everybody to learn the job, right? And a common mantra was, it's going to take you 5 years before you feel maybe some degree of comfort at an operation, right? With all these new tools and operations and procedures. And so it was if you wanted a challenge, you're into learning, that was the place to be, right? In addition to wanting to be active and go to fires, but you hit the nail on the head, right? So I remember standing with Louis at one of two, right? I think we had firefighter Williams in the Rockaway and Lieutenant Clancy killed just prior to Louis Valentino, right?
A few days apart
And
too.
and standing, next to Louis and having a chat with him at one of those funerals, right? And bearing the cold together. Both were very cold days, but I didn't know Louis before, but I certainly got to learn about his history, his impact on the city, his impact on the fire department. Got to meet his family. Right. Fortunately, I was away for just the 30th anniversary of his passing, right, February 5th,
Mhm.
and so they had a gathering at Greenwood Cemetery, and acknowledged and honored his contribution to the world. What a wonderful guy, right, and a great family, big Italian family, and but it was right. And so what I was going to mention before, right, what maybe could have prepared me back when I was in Ladder 154, although I wasn't working for these incidents. We lost Lieutenant Williams in Rescue 4. I don't know if I have that date. Did I write that
That
down?
was 91
That was
when he was
91 or
killed.
92, maybe.
Yeah.
And I remember Lieutenant Buckeye was working. We weren't working. It was a night tour, right? That incident happens. I know Mike Milner, right, was working for that. I've
Yep,
heard
he
him tell
was.
the story.
Mhm.
And the next day tour, we're going to, I think it was the Bureau of Health Services, right, which was over in Manhattan on, Lafayette Street, right, and we passed by, right, and we kind of, went over what had happened at operation, but just to realize that's the first line of duty death that I was, somehow attached to, right? Not that I operated, not that I was a close friend or colleague of Lieutenant Williams. I had worked at Rescue 4 on details, but and then we had Wayne Smith, right? In Ladder 136, Captain Smith was killed at a fire that Ladder 154 operated, right? So wasn't that I was immune or didn't know that it was part of the job, but then boy, you get slapped in the face, right? Now, Louis Valentino, a member of our company, killed in the line of duty, and just the impact, that one line of duty death had on the company would fast forward to 2001, right? Like, oh my gosh, right? And it was all consuming, right? And the desire, the need, and the resources that were put in place to support Louis' family and the company, and to see, the outpouring of support from the city. Mayor Giuliani was in our quarters that evening, and then, just the surrounding companies and the larger fire department in general, right? And again, you got to see a display of the caliber and character of, the leadership and all the membership of the FDNY, right, in support of our company that lost a member, and trying to support his family.
And lest we forget, around the time you got to Rescue 2, that same month, Sniper McLaughlin, Pete McLaughlin, gets killed in Rescue 4 at a fire over in Queens.
That's
so
right.
Yeah. It was a rough time for several of the companies during that time. There's a lot of line of duty deaths, to where if you look at the spike periods pre 9/11, guys who were working in the safety battalion during that time will tell you there was a massive spike, really from Watch Street in 94 up until 97, 98 with Vandalia Avenue. And of course, prior to that, Atlantic Avenue over the summer of 98. So it was a tough time. A lot of good guys were lost during that period. I want to go back to something you said earlier about, and again, a lot of guys have said this, and I always go back to something that Joe Kanaski said in the documentary Still Riding. We ride on a big toolbox. It really is a big toolbox. It's not just the fires with Rescue 2 or any rescue company, and of course later on in 98 with the advent of the squads, any squad company. It's every other emergency you can go to too. Building collapses, really serious MVAs. With the rescue, water rescues, of course, and you're surrounded by a body of water. Manhattan, of course, with the Hudson River and other bodies of water throughout the 5 boroughs. From that standpoint, first on the training alone, and you can dive into the responses too. What did you most enjoy about the different trainings outside of the fires, of course? And tell me about the thing that maybe you weren't so skilled on before you got to Rescue 2 that you trained on, and at the end of that time, you felt, okay, I may not be a master at this, but I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a prerequisite. However, many individuals, many firefighters who sought to make their way to a rescue company at the time would seek, basic, dive training, right, as a certification, basic, underwater. I forget the term for it, right? But get your dive certification, right? A basic dive certification. Now, you didn't have to have that, but it showed commitment, right? It would be a telltale to the captain you were going to interview with that you were interested. So not that I ever felt where I was comfortable, but I certainly, I think, felt proficient enough to trust myself, in a dive operation setting, right? I didn't come with a lot of dive experience, and I think that many would agree with me, many fellows who were in my shoes. That's one of the tougher emergencies that we respond to, especially when you're diver one and you're, going into the water in some of the places that we would operate, right? And I did, dive 4 times, right? Legit dive rescues. An incident up in the Bronx where 2 young kids were missing, and rescue 3 at the time wasn't, a dive rescue. They were still the only collapse rescue,
Yeah.
in the city, and rescue 1 2, 4, and 5 were at that point. So they called for a third rescue. We were the third rescue, and I actually made a dive there. I did a beach dive in the Rockaways one time, a dive into Newtown Creek for a car in the water early in the morning, and and one other time I'm forgetting. But yeah, just the thought of actually finding a victim that you can't see, right? I think somebody explained on either one, your podcast or another, you have no visibility underwater, right? And especially back then, thinking of Newtown Creek or the East River or whatever at the time, and just the thought of actually bumping into somebody. But in terms of, yeah, where I felt least prepared to what I think I felt at some point was the dive training, but all the training was great, and we did a lot. Of course, we focused on what would become known in our books as managing members in distress scenarios, right, where we would have firefighters in need of assistance, right? That was our bread and butter, right? To be there, be positioned in a building to be able to respond to a mayday or an urgent call. And so that was a constant thing we trained on, right? How to communicate with one another, how to take cues from the boss, where to be, how to best extricate and remove somebody from a building, and something that would, and maybe we get to later on in my staff career in terms of response, was the focus on, put the fire out and problems go away, right?
Yeah.
And don't abandon the focus and emphasis on fire control, right, to the distraction of the member in distress, right? So know how to allocate resources to deal with that incident within an incident, right, which is a serious incident. But again, the big picture is, we have this fire, and again, you get water on the fire, and things get better, right? So I did I answer your question, or did I go
Yeah. Yeah.
really
And
off
I don't,
tangent?
I don't mind. Like we talked about off air, me, the show. I sit back, I let the guest, just drive it. I'm not really one to interrupt in that regard. So I appreciate it because again, it highlights a good point. This is not to diminish the other things that go on the fire ground. Yes, properly placing the ladder and throwing the ladder is key. Yes, making the hydrant properly and making sure there's no kinks in the line is key. Making sure you have all the tools you're going to need. Making sure your pack is on correctly and you're not pissing air. All that stuff is important. Don't get me wrong. But the most important thing is making sure you have that water going so that all those other positive developments that need to occur on the fire ground for the mission to be successful can occur. It starts with, again, you put the wet stuff on the red stuff. And it's a simple formula. And as long as that step comes first before anything else, hey, you know what? You're on the right pathway. And that's something that certainly was instilled in you from the jump, going back to your volunteer days, and followed you over the course of your career. Now, what's interesting is, and this is where I want to move ahead a little bit now to 252. 98, we already had squads in existence. Squad 1 had been in existence for a very long time in New York City, and it was in Brooklyn, of course. But as far as the advent of the other squads, the story is well documented by now, and the quarter century of it just passed a few years ago. They take engine companies that weren't getting a lot of work, that were kind of middle of the road, converted them into squads. It's one of the best ideas the department ever came up with. And with that, amongst the 7 squads that end up going into effect in the Special Operations Command in the summer of 1998, Engine 252 becomes Squad 252. So now you got Squad 1 and Squad 252. We get, of course, the tragedy of 9/11 and the many, many losses that occurred, not just the rescues, but Special Operations Command. I think of the 343 guys that died that day, 97 of them were from SOC. But just to go back a moment before you became a lieutenant, think about the examples you have in 2. Captain Fischler, Lieutenant Mojica, I believe, was there before he went to Rescue 1 and was a lieutenant over there until he gave his life that day. Yeah, Lieutenant Pete Martin, who was there for a while, too. I don't know if he was a lieutenant around that time, but another great officer who embodied what it meant to be a rescue fireman specifically. I don't know if it was already at the forefront of your mind in terms of wanting to be an officer, but I imagine being around guys like that, and even senior guys that weren't officers but just carry themselves in such an excellent way, made you start to say around that time frame, you know what, maybe I should take the test? Or was that something that you already had in the back of your mind?
Yeah, interesting point, right? So, yeah, prior to 9/11, I mean, 9/11, what, I got 985, so what, I had 15, 16 years, right, on
Right.
given the approach of 9/11. Um, I was, I was an engineer and I was fairly active in terms of a side job doing fire protection engineering consulting. And, I was doing okay. And my thought was, hey, I'll get to 20, I'll have a pension and maybe I'll pursue this. 9/11 happens and that there's a switch, right? And I said, I got to stay. I think I have some time now and some experience um, and, and, time to give back, right? And I really do love this job. I have benefited by my experiences from all the people I've been surrounded by, all the great individuals. I had decided a little before then to study for pension purposes, maybe get promoted to lieutenant, improve the pension a little bit when I got to 20. But 9/11 really fostered a spirit of, I don't know what you want to define it as, but
Resolve,
time to really
resilience.
dig in, give back.
Yeah.
There was an innate sense that, yeah, there was rebuilding. I didn't know what my role would be, eventually in it, but I wanted to contribute to whatever that was, right? And so, yeah, the test was supposed to have been given in October of 2001, ends up getting delayed to, I think it was March of '02.
Okay. I didn't want to ignore this question. Bill McGrade, who's I think a retired NYPD detective, first grade. He has a couple questions. I didn't mean to ignore you, Bill. The first one is that one: did you ever work with Chief Ted Jankowski?
I know who he is. I don't think we ever worked together in the same company. I know we worked at same fires together, right?
Mhm.
He was, I think, an officer and a chief in Brooklyn, or we've crossed paths on occasion. And I think he then went to either Greenwich or Stamford, Connecticut, possibly, head of public safety up there.
Yeah.
But I certainly know who he is, and well-respected fire chief.
And the other question, and I believe it's 1995 to 2002, but just to confirm what years he wants to know, because he was a friend of Louis Valentino's and a good one.
Oh,
Were you
okay.
at Rescue too?
Yeah, I got there in October of '85, and I get promoted then in December of 2002.
Okay. 95.
Did I say 85,
Yeah,
95? I'm
95,
sorry.
95.
The fives, right?
Yeah, the fives. It's easy to get it mixed up. Don't worry. So again, another interesting point, and we'll get to the advent, like we talked about off air, of a temporary rescue company in the form of Rescue 6 around the time of the RNC in '04. But 252, like we said, SOC got hit hard on 9/11, unfortunately. The department as a whole got hit hard, as we know. Going to 252, some guys appreciated the squads when they came in '98, others not so much. Like with anything in the FDNY, there's growing pains associated with it. But hindsight being what it is, we can now see again what a great decision that was to implement them. It's not like they're unfamiliar with special operations components. They're doing a lot of the same work. Maybe there's certain things the rescue will do that the squad will not, but overall the concept is similar. Being a new officer is not easy, even though you had a lot of time on the job at this point. But did the fact that you were going from one special operations company, and a very well respected one at that, to another one make that transition easier, considering you were doing still the same type of work?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're correct. I think that, you had a perspective as a rescue firefighter, number one, um, in many circumstances, as would an officer, right? You were either operating, with another individual, or without the officer having to make decisions, take cues. You got to see many different um, companies at work being led by many different, take the landscape of officers, right? Many really, really great officers, some middle of the road and some maybe not so good, right? So you got to see things from a different perspective than maybe you would have being a firefighter, an engine, or a ladder company, right? So that was helpful. And yeah, you worked with great people. I had the, benefit of spending a year at the rescue school prior to going to Squad 252. And that was, informative and a great learning opportunity, and getting to meet the firefighters from, across all the companies in SOC. And to your point, I was there from '03 to '04, and we were in the midst of rebuilding, right? So we were constantly running all the different rescue school offerings, right? The tech rescue school, confined space, high angle, collapse,
Hmm.
right? And getting to see the best of what rescue operations had to offer, delivering those programs, right? And reinforcing skills. So what a great opportunity for me to, brush up on places I might have felt a little weak, right? And Rescue 2, we weren't doing the high angle work that Rescue 1 was, right? So
Right.
didn't feel as strong in that discipline. But, I would later, I think, improve my skill level there. And so all that helped me when eventually I left the rescue school and would go to Squad 252 on a until further order basis. Tony Tricarico was the captain, and Freddie LaFamina was, I think, functioning as the chief of rescue operations. And it worked out that there was an opening there, and they kind of slid me right in. And to your point, right, there were, how could I not want to be there, right? I mean, would I have maybe preferred and maybe thought about going to a rescue as a lieutenant coming, from a rescue as a firefighter? Yeah, without a doubt, right? But rescue operations company, I drank the Kool-Aid at that point, and I felt comfortable. And maybe I was a little chicken as well, right? I was a little spoiled, right? When you're in a rescue operations company, you're dealing with all motivated individuals who are, you don't have to try to, coax them or get them to train. You're going to come downstairs. They're going to be training already, right? So,
Right.
I didn't have to, bring a skill set maybe to bear that others who weren't as spoiled as me in rescue operations companies got the benefit of walking into, right? And think about who was there before me, right? I did work with Pete Martin for a short time as a firefighter in Rescue 2. He becomes one of the, I think, original lieutenants in Squad 252 when they form it, and then comes back to Rescue 2 as a boss. I worked with Pete as a boss, and then he's, like you said, unfortunately killed on 9/11, but also killed on 9/11, the boss in Squad 252, Timmy Higgins,
Hmm.
who,
Yeah.
great firefighter, right? And
Hmm.
I said it on Getting Salty, and I think he was the, if you want to know the greatest fireman, each of us ever worked with, I would put Timmy Higgins' name out there. He was just an unbelievable firefighter, unbelievable in emergencies. I'm sure he was great dealing with administrative challenges and personnel issues because he was just an incredible thinker. Man was a
Hmm.
genius and incredible on the fire ground. So, yeah, I mean, I love the opportunity to go to Squad 252 and work with Tony Tricarico. Steve Mockler was lieutenant there, Bobby Cheeseman at the time, Chisano.
Yep.
So, yeah, it was a good group and never boring, right? Because to your point you made, the squads were still rebuilding, right? One of the knocks against them from others was they were very young, very junior, and they were. But fast forward several years, when I would now become a covering captain, I'm not going to force you to go there yet, but they became very senior relative to the
Right.
rescues at that point, right? Because now the rescue senior guys in the rescues are retiring and getting promoted, and they're refilling, right? And now the squads, 252 especially, become more senior, relatively speaking, right? So yeah, it was great, and they were motivated, and we would whatever I wanted to drill on or they wanted to drill on, we would be drilling, and it was talk about a sense of self satisfaction was helping to evolve rescue operations post 9/11 and into the future.
And there's really, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's no limit on what you can do as a squad. Compare, and the same thing is if you're in the rescue, there's really no limit on what you can do. So in the squad's case, if it's your first due area, you'll function as an engine. Second due as a truck. Third due as a squad.
Well, no, well, 'cause all but Squad 1, right? All the
Mm.
squads now, and Squad 8 wasn't a squad then, right?
Yeah,
But the
yeah, more
squads
recent.
then all had first, second, and third due engine boxes.
Okay.
So you would first, second, or third due operate as an engine. And think about Squad 252. When I got there, wasn't my doing. Very disciplined, right? Even though you might hear people, complain, they were cowboys or they very disciplined. If you were second due engine, you were helping with the first line, which was responsibility in general of the second arriving engine, right? And you would do CFR responses, certified first responder responses in your response area. But beyond that, you would operate as a special unit. And my mantra to the fellas that I worked with was, you're in a squad, you're not a rescue, but it doesn't matter. You get there, and whatever your special unit assignment is, you better be able to carry it out, whether it's at a fire or an emergency. We didn't squads, right? They weren't municipal rescue divers. They were eventually taught to support dive operations. So that's one thing the rescues, had the ability, the training, and the resources for that the squads didn't, and didn't have the collapse resources right on hand that the five rescues, would have. But certainly learned how to do all those special operations, the confined space, the collapse, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And even then, again, you had experience in that from the rescues. One of my favorite stories, I don't know if you were working that night, but Lieutenant Mohican, Bob Gallione, saved a guy from a building collapse in 1997. People don't realize how often, especially with the amount of construction that goes on in New York City, it brings back the iconic Mark Twain line, New York City be a real nice place if they ever finish it. There's always something going on, especially look at the expansion of Brooklyn. Compare Brooklyn to when you got there to the rescue in 95 to what it is now. Oh my God, especially downtown Brooklyn, specifically the borough is night and day. So that training alone kept you busy because these were very realistic scenarios, especially with the different buildings going up that you may have had to encounter. At some point, you probably did encounter. And that was a 5-year stretch, I believe, before you made captain in 07 that you were at 252. So who knows how many of those types of emergencies you went to.
Oh, yeah. Confined space operations at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, collapse operations, building shoring, high angle operations. Yeah, all different types of fire duty. And a great thing about being in Squad 252 was there was first due engine work, right? We were doing, which I hadn't done in how many years,
Yeah,
right?
it's
So
been a
that
little
was
bit, yeah.
interesting. I almost made a fatal, made a fatal error in that I don't know if I was asked or voluntold, but around the time of the Republican National Convention in '94, I believe, the job put a sixth rescue into service, Rescue 6 in Lower Manhattan,
Yeah.
in the quarters of Ladder 20. And Chief Norman at the time asked then Captain George Healy, now Deputy Chief George Healy, to be the captain of that unit, and he asked him to select, 3 lieutenants, and he reached out to Lieutenant Marmon, who was in Squad 270 at the time, Jimmy Kiesling, who now is the captain of Squad 1, was a covering lieutenant, unbelievable firefighter, another genius who I worked with in Rescue 2, and myself, and and so I said yes. Talked to Captain Tricarico. He said, "Yeah, go give it a try." Right? He was really good. There was some some buzz that maybe they would keep Rescue 6 in service, in perpetuity. But that was who knew. But very interesting time for me. It ended up being 6 months. I forget the time frame prior to, and then a month or two after the convention. And that was my Manhattan exposure. I hadn't spent any appreciable amount of time in Manhattan, but that was a great learning opportunity for me to learn, buildings with elevators and loft buildings and the different types of construction and responses and infrastructure that Manhattan had to bring, right? So, but thankfully, and a great group of guys. What they did was they detailed 2 members from each of the rescue operations units, each of the rescues and squads, uh, for a 6-month period to rescue six. And we really had a great group of people. Not all of them were that excited that they got yanked out of their company. Many of them were the junior members, but to the individual, they all were invested and contributed. It was a lot of heavy lifting initially, outfitting a new rescue rig, not a new rescue rig, but you just had it up there, right? The
Yep.
Spirit of
Spirit of
St. Louis.
Oklahoma. Yeah.
And getting that equipped, setting up what we call a gold room in the firehouse where we store all the equipment that we're going to need to to outfit the rig and so a lot of heavy lifting. But and there were 3 fires. Jimmy Kiesling got all 3 fires that we had, and the rest of us were talking about those fires. But thankfully, Captain Tricarico took me back, and I would eventually get assigned there until I got promoted to captain.
And it brings up an interesting point, because think about where we are when this 6th rescue company went into service. Those of you that may be saying, Rescue 6, yeah, it's a temporary company because it's 2004. Everybody, and you can attest to this, producer Victor, who was living in New York City at the time, he grew up in Washington Heights and later lived in the Bronx, and attested to this. Everybody from really 2002, I would say the first 5 years after 9/11, especially those early years, 02 to 04, are walking around like this. They're kind of overcoming the shock of the event itself and the tragedy behind it. And everybody's understandably looking around going, okay, that was awful. What's next? What else are they going to potentially throw at us, especially in these larger cities? And in 04, it's a political hotbed. President Bush is running for re-election. Without going into too deep of the details, everybody that lived through that time knows what was going on. The invasion of Iraq the year before, the culmination of the war on terror kicking off in high drive in the spring of 03, New York City's always been a target. New York City was especially a target during that time, with the Republican National Convention being held at Madison Square Garden. So the advent of a 6th rescue company was not only a good idea for its time, but also, dare I say, a necessity for its time because of the nature of the times that everybody was living in.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, one could question, well, was it really necessary? But you make a very valid point. We were on a terror footing, right? Prevention, preparedness, trying to be situationally aware to the world around us. And so I would argue and support the decision making that went on well above my pay grade, that perhaps it did make sense, even though, some of the, foot soldiers, so to speak, weren't too happy, namely the members of Rescue 1 at the time, right? Because we were cutting into their work. But I think you're right. I think, from a planning and preparation perspective, it was the right move at the time. And then history would then again, prove that, probably wasn't necessary to keep it in service in perpetuity, right? It wouldn't have been cost justified to make such a move.
Yeah, but for the context of where we were, 03, 04, certainly sensical for that particular context. Not so much sensical now, especially now with 8 squads, 5 rescues. Special Operations Command is pretty well covered and pretty well staffed. Now I'll get to making captain. I see your question, Tyson. I'll get to it momentarily. I do see it, though. I don't want you to think I'm ignoring it. That gets us to 07. By this point, 22 years in the job, 21, 22 years in the job, approximately. You make captain. You'd been through a lot of both really good experiences, like we talked about, and just detailed, really challenging experiences with what happened in 2001 and the aftermath. Go into Division 14 and then rescue operations, but we'll start with Division 14. Tell me about the makeup of the division at the time and just kind of bouncing around until you had a permanent spot.
Yeah, quick. I never had a permanent spot. Quick Division 14. I when I got promoted, I went to visit Chief Steve, right? Who was could be intimidating, right? I think Kevin
certainly
refers to perhaps that persona, but had a really great conversation. He acknowledged I probably wouldn't be there that long, which was the same conversation I had with Chief D. Domenico as a newly promoted to lieutenant in Division 13, and talked about he knew my father from maybe Proby School, and I think I did three or four tours maybe 2 weeks in the division when I get a call from, I think it's Chief LaFamina still at the time, that, there were a number of rescue operations captains, and I forget who they all were, 3 or 4 at one time, were never going back full duty, right? Either were, granted disability retirements or just were, determined that they weren't coming back, right? So now there's a need to replenish the captain's rank in rescue operations. And so 3 of us, I think it was myself, Tony Tedeschi, who would become the captain of Squad 270, and Kevin Murphy, were all brought back. We were, all SOC firefighters and lieutenants. And so here I am. I can't tell you much about Division 14 as a captain because I didn't have much of a perspective as a captain other than a handful of tours. Don't think I did any fire duty, but, I got to train in a couple places and maybe, 1 or 2 places that hadn't done a lot of training. But yeah, I was fortunate to come back to rescue operations in my mind, right? So.
Yeah, it embodied to that point over a decade of your career between the rescue and the squad. And that brings us into Tyson's question. Now it segues well into it. Thanks for the question, Tyson. Having the experience of having been a rescue, pertaining to rescue operations, and squad boss, of course, that 5-year stretch in 252, which of the two did you prefer?
I'm going to be politically correct, but I'm not doing it to be politically correct.
Right.
It really didn't matter, right? If I was, working in a rescue or squad, in my mind, it didn't matter, right? I was going in to hopefully lead a team that was well prepared to take on whatever role we were given, right? And I think I was a captain in Squad 41. We worked with Rescue 1 at a trench operation right on the northern boundaries of Rescue 1's response area in Manhattan. We did a great job, the team, and not me, the team, right? They were well prepared. All I did was point the flashlight, make a couple of recommendations, worked well together with rescue, and we rescued an individual that was trapped in a trench. And so just great experiences in both companies. And again, my philosophy was just get your job done. Didn't matter whether it was in a fire emergency. So the rig looks a little different, but operationally somewhat similar, right? And regardless of the circumstance or the incident type.
Now, again, it kind of segues, and I don't mean to gloss over your time as a captain, but the question burns, no pun intended, within me. So, it's imperative I ask it. 2012, making BC, 27 years in the job. Again, your transition's different than most. Not to say it's easier. It's still hard because they always say firefighter to lieutenant, captain, and chief are the 2 hardest transitions a fire officer can make over the course of his career. You're already thinking on a broad scale, though. Think about it. As a rescue firefighter, it forces you to think on a broad scale because you're responding to a broad, array of emergencies on any rescue company you're assigned to. When you became boss in 252, a SOC company, same thing, thinking on a broad scale. Rescue battalion as a captain, same thing, broad scale. When you became a BC, and now you got multiple divisions that you had the chance to work in over that time frame before you made deputy in 17, was that transition a little bit easier? Because not only a lot of time as an officer by that point, but a lot of time doing special operations work that forces you to think outside, forget 1 box, 10 boxes.
Well, in one sense, it gave me some maybe benefit in terms of operations, right? And how
Right.
I can trust companies regardless, engine ladder, rescue squad. But on the other hand, it was probably my toughest transition, right? Because as a rescue captain, unlike captains in engines or ladders, we don't act out of title, right? So you go around the city on any tour, there could be in each borough or each, I don't know how you break it down, but a significant number of captains acting as battalion chiefs, right? And especially those on the battalion chiefs list, that's who gets picked first to act as a battalion chief. Rescue captains didn't do that, right? They didn't take us out of our companies. And I was never assigned a unit, but, I worked primarily in rescues and squads. They didn't want to have to backfill your spot in a rescue or squad with a covering officer from who knows where in the city, right? So I didn't have the benefit of gaining at bats, if you will, or gaining, experience as an acting battalion chief, which I think is very helpful to, those captains who do aspire to become a battalion chief. And what you lose too, from a rescue operations perspective, is a grounding on what the, engines and ladders and battalions are doing on an everyday routine basis, right? Because, in a rescue, you're not doing that, right? You're not going out to elevator emergencies or water leaks or, car accidents that don't involve extrications, right? And especially what happens in rescue, put the fire out, you get on the rig, you go home.
Right.
Car accident, you get the person out, you get on the rig, you go home. What happens after, right? Like,
There's
so
a lot of
for
moving
me,
parts.
that I benefited greatly from what we call the Chiefs Command School, and getting to mentor with seasoned battalion chiefs in the field. I think I looked forward to that and maybe benefited more than some of the fellas I was promoted with. And let me just mention one fellow that really was, a fellow that's unfortunately passed from 9/11 related illness, cancer, E.J. Tierney. And I don't know if you've ever had the, really the, privilege of meeting EJ, but
I
what an
did not,
incredible
unfortunately.
individual. Longtime captain of ladder 30. We get promoted together, and he's at the time 61 or 62. Senior guy, been around. I don't know EJ well other than by reputation, which is a stellar one. We end up in the command school together, and we were a relatively senior group in the command school. But EJ, here's a guy that's not going to be able to get to full chief's pay because he's going to age out prior to that time. And you would think seasoned, been to, seen everything, done everything. What's he going to? He was, just his desire to learn, to accept, to question, to be part of the crowd, not to, drop his seniority or his. I mean, what an individual, just a genuine. Talk about again those, the caliber and the wonderful character of individuals I had the opportunity to be with, and he's certainly, he's an example of one of those in spades.
Absolutely. I'm glad you can mention him. I didn't have the pleasure of meeting him or getting the chance to profile him on this program, but this is what I love about speaking with any first responder that worked, especially in New York City on the police side or the fire side. There's a lot of great names that we didn't get the chance to speak to, but get
Right. And
mentioned.
unfortunately, you won't be able to speak with them, sadly.
Right. And get memorialized properly as they should be on this program. Now, you make deputy chief in 2017. I love what you said earlier because, right, you had something that had you just wanted to go 20 and out and leave in 2005, you very well could have. But you stayed, and it's like, wow, look at where I am now. I'm a freaking deputy chief. Who could have imagined that, of course, when you came on in 1985? You had the chance to work, and it's funny, we talked about the safety battalion earlier as it pertained to some of the tragedies the FDNY dealt with in the mid-90s. You had the chance to work with the chief of safety. Being the chief of safety for a department that's relatively large in any major American city is hard enough. It's harder when you have a city of 8 million people and thousands, well, hundreds at least, of firefighters that work across the 5 boroughs. So getting the chance to work alongside that particular chief at that time, how much of an eye-opener was that for you from the standpoint that safety is always paramount on the fire ground, but getting a chance to work in a battalion exclusively dedicated to that, did it teach you new things about firefighter safety?
Yeah, well, I didn't work in the battalion. I worked in the rescue battalion for most of my time as a battalion chief. Then Paul Cressy, who was the chief of safety just prior to my getting promoted to deputy, asked me if I would come and serve as his executive officer. And I never saw my career heading in that direction. Certainly came out of the blue. I helped him out on a project prior to, so we knew one another. And I mean, another incredibly smart, visionary, focused individual, Paul Cressy. Turns out we were in Proby school together, but I was 24, he was 34, right? So we were a little bit of an age difference. So he was getting ready to retire, and he asked me to come be his XO, and he had a succession plan in mind. He said, and he had talked to the chief of department, I would, upon his retirement, be the chief of safety, right? So I said, well, geez, I wasn't planning on staying that long, but boy, it sounds like an interesting opportunity, another chance to learn another part of the job, and maybe have some kind of positive impact, right? Help to innovate a little bit if the circumstances allowed, and it turned out to be a great opportunity. When I was there, we did a lot of good things, right? Between the time as XO and when I was in the acting role as chief of safety, learning what the safety battalion did, what the safety command did in terms of providing for firefighter safety, right? Oversees the research and development part of the fire department, oversees the safety battalion, oversees the collision prevention and collision reporting efforts, oversees the injury reporting aspects of the department. So this small command, boy, contributes a whole lot to the department, and works, closely with the Bureau of Operations and the Chief of Operations. I know Chief Lieb.
Yes.
I had the foresight as I think I was still the XO, to form a contamination risk reduction committee, right, focusing on trying to prevent or limit cancer, right, in the fire department. And I, had the foresight to put Lieb as the chairperson of that effort. And well, look at him now, right? He's now the managing director of the First Responder Center for Excellence, right? So, that was, I think we had a positive impact. We created a campaign focusing on cancer risk reduction. I think we made some positive moves in terms of improving our PPE. Unfortunately, my first day as the acting chief of safety was the Michael Davidson fire.
Yeah.
Sad event. A lot to learn from that event, but gave me the unique insight into how that part of what we do in the FDNY works, right? A line of duty death investigation, right? The chief of safety actually is the one who starts the line of duty death investigation, right? And it's unbelievable the passion and the attention to detail and the focus that those battalion chiefs who perform that investigation, time and effort to produce a report that will, help the department going forward and hopefully prevent, similar or related tragedies.
I don't know, because I did promise you, and this is something I very much want to discuss with you, because we said we would spend some time with it. I don't know if this was this portion of your career, a little bit before, a little bit after, but New York Task Force 1, which is a huge component of FEMA, a huge component, of course, involving USAR. Unique task force in that, I believe, I don't know if it's still this way, but for a long time, it was the only task force to involve law enforcement, because, of course, you have you guys in the FDNY and also the members of the NYPD Emergency Service Unit that are involved with it as well. What your role centered on specifically, or one of the things you were involved in, was incident support. So we said we would shine a light on it, and let's take the time to do that.
Oh, yeah, just in a nutshell, I know we're probably pushing the boundaries of time, but New York
fine.
Task Force 1 is one of 28 national urban search and rescue task forces in a national system. 8 of them are in California, and the rest are spread around the country too, in Florida. And we have New York Task Force 1. And you're correct, we are I think the only task force that's wholly staffed. Right, when it goes out the door, the roster is made up of all New York City employees, right? PD and FD kind of split down the middle. PD has the canines, right?
Yep.
We don't have the canines. FD has the medics and the engineers. The structural specialists is the position title on the task force roster. And I was right place, right time. Ray Downey contacts my father because he realizes I was an engineering graduate. They're starting the system. I believe myself, Steve Spall retires as a chief out of the 9th Battalion, and John Flynn retired as captain out of Hazmat. We were the probably charter members or among the charter members of New York Task Force One, right? Because it was such a unique skill set we brought to the team, and most other of the 28 teams, they would have to outsource for engineering support. They would find engineers from the community or doctors from the community, right? We had our own FDNY, Bureau of Health Service and EMS doctors. So yeah. So I start back in whenever, about 84, 83 or 84, right? Just prior to the Oklahoma, bombing.
Yeah,
And I don't get
1995. Yeah.
deployed on that. I'm out of town doing work, I think in Cleveland, coincidentally enough, in a federal office building. But yeah, through that involvement and giving 9/11, I had the benefit of taking on different challenges, learning to be a plans manager, learning to be a task force manager. Went to school with Jack Flatley. Went to task force leader school with Jack Flatley, who's a battalion chief in Battalion 50. Rob Lukash, I don't know, you must
He's
know
been on my
Rob,
show.
right?
Yep, he's been on my show.
Retired. And Mike Kenny, just recently retired sergeant from ESU.
Another
Really
good man.
great guys. We had a great week together down at Fort Lauderdale, learning some skills to become task force leaders that would lead me to become a deputy incident support team leader. So whenever a task force deploys, one of the 28 task forces, they send overhead in the form of what they call the incident support team. And that's kind of analogous to an incident management team, which members of the FDNY, would know about. And just your oversight in the field to help task, because you're not the incident commander, you're working for the authority having jurisdiction, but you get tasks and you're essentially leading the urban search and rescue effort in the field, and then you support those task forces that are in the field. And in that capacity, I mean, as a task force member, I was down at Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane George down in, I think we went to the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, that was
A
98.
number of responses, right? And as a member of the IST, several flood events, South Carolina, Louisiana, right before Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Now, at the time, I'm the deputy incident support team leader. The fellow who was the incident support team leader says he's going to retire, and I get moved up. I have about a year experience, which is very little experience, but out the door we go, and had the opportunity in 2017 to lead the incident support team operations and the urban search and rescue response in the field in both Florida and Puerto Rico in response to Hurricanes Irma and Maria. So great opportunity, great folks I got to interact with. Again, Chief Downey, right? One of the godfathers or grandfathers of the system, Ray Downey, Freddie LaFamina, did a whole lot to propel New York Task Force One's ability to operate. Now I think Joe Downey is the lead in that effort. So really great adjunct to my, fire FDNY specific focus was my involvement with the urban search and rescue effort.
Oh yeah, and it's still doing great work to this day. And it's always, even though we wish these disasters weren't happening around the country and around certain parts of the world, any part of the world for that matter, it always is nice to see how well they gel together, how well they work together, and the great work they're able to consistently do. When these disasters strike, I mean, Haiti in 2010 is another great example. Locally, they were certainly put to the test with Hurricane Sandy in 2012, just from their own commands alone. But all those
Well, and
experiences.
from my experience in Sandy, I happened to be in on Roosevelt Island, battalion chief. I was put in charge of operations for rescue ops.
Mhm.
Now, operations doesn't mean I was the incident commander. I was just coordinating rescue
Right.
operations from, I was in the rear with the gear, as they say, right? I
Mhm.
wasn't in the field, but monitoring communications. But I was the guy, probably 2 or 3 in the morning, that made a call to Freddie Endricat, who then was the urban search and rescue, branch leader for FEMA, saying, "Hey, Fred, send the armada, right? We're going to need some help up here, right?" And they responded rapidly, right, and got a bunch of resources to us. Did a great job.
as was needed during that time, because that was not a great time. But thankfully, we all got through it. Now, between your time as a deputy assistant chief and then ultimately an assistant chief, and we said we would shine a light on this too, which I very much look forward to. Bureau of Fire Prevention enveloped a good part of this portion of your career. And again, what firefighter doesn't love to go to fires? Name me the firefighter that doesn't, and they should probably pick a different profession. However, that being said, prevention is also key too, because even though it's great to go to fires, the aftermath of it is terrible. Families lose property. In some cases, people lose their lives. Sometimes, if they don't themselves get killed in the fire, pets do. It's a terrible thing. And we've seen tragedies like, well, Twin Parks in the Bronx, where the name of the game afterwards, when the postmortem comes out on us, is had, and you hear in the news all the time, had X, Y, and Z factor been taken care of prior, the fire wouldn't have occurred. So getting that message out to a broader public is key, because again, it's nice to have the fire department respond, but if you can prevent something terrible like that happening to you, that's even better at the end of the day. So when it came to that portion of your career, a lot of people don't really know the full depth of what that bureau does. Explain it for them.
Yeah, so it's a business, right? I mean, and it's to your point. It's you have to kind of switch gears on a daily basis. You're not focused on operations. You're as chief of fire prevention, in essence, running. It's got a $69 million budget. We were bringing 72 million a year to the city coffers in revenue. Mostly permit related fees, and broken down into a wide landscape of fire prevention focuses, fire alarm plan review, fire alarm inspections. We had an explosives unit. They were mostly focused on, in today's day and age, special effects in the Broadway district, and Fourth of July, New Year's Eve, and other events with special effects. We had a rooftop unit, and New York City's becoming, jammed in terms of the rooftops, right?
Yeah.
With cell services and solar panels and such. We had what we call technology management, and they were the engineers that would look at things that, where people are trying to color a little outside the box, but still meet the intent of the building and fire codes. We had a suppression unit. They were sprinklers and standpipes. Range hood unit, right? That makes sense. They'd be so just a wide range, and really good people, a lot of really good people focusing on, to your point, prevention. Two of the, I think, most important units, which maybe don't get the recognition, what was the code development unit, right? And so that was made up of a small group of people. Right now, it's a woman named Kelly Carr. They moved them out of fire prevention into legal, but they're focusing on evolving the fire code, looking ahead, right? And what are threats that we know about now and or looming, and how do we have to, deal with that from a regulatory perspective? They do an unbelievable job. Technology management, looking at how when somebody wants a variance per se, right, from the fire code or from the building code, how can, does it work? Is it safe? Applying engineering methodologies to make those determinations, right? So it was a very interesting time there. We dealt with interesting and challenging, complex issues during the pandemic. Outdoor dining presented propane, which, through history in New York City, propane has been prohibited, right? For outdoor, for heating, right? For comfort heating, I think is the term used in the code. Well, they wanted to heat these outdoor dining areas, and think of New York, right? As the vast subterranean infrastructure, subways, all our utilities are underground, our restaurants. Think about Midtown, right? The typical block in Midtown. Where's the restaurant? Well, it's on the street below
Right.
a 50, 60-story building, next
Right.
to a 6-story building, right? So
Jammed together.
we don't want to see. There was and you probably did Google but was it? The year was like 1988. Had a propane explosion in Borough Park, killed several people. It was in the the Hasidic area in a hardware store. So we know, and not only New York City, but other places. So what a fight we had against the de Blasio administration of just allowing wholesale, use, but more importantly, storage of propane throughout New York City. And I fear that it's going to rear its ugly head again. I read in the news recently that they're, going to, reinvigorate a pursuit of outdoor dining, right? And I'm sure that's going to follow suit. But Kelly Carr's done a great job of sort of holding the dam, if you will. But a great group. There's a group there, Special Inspections Unit. It used to be called something else. We changed the title of the unit. They go out and assist the field units in dealing with complex fire prevention issues. And what a great resource to the department and the role they play. And I see somebody put, if I can, how the chief like being the citywide tour commander and any notable incidents. It was a way that certainly as chief of fire prevention, I stayed kind of connected to operations, right, and the field, and I made sure I got to visit at least one, if not a couple firehouses, certainly on the night tours during the week or anytime during the day and the weekend. And had a number of significant, many multiple alarms as citywide tour commander. Right when I started, I was, newly promoted to deputy assistant chief. There was a rash of cucklaw fires in the Bronx.
Yeah.
And so if you were working, the citywide, you had command duty, it was likely you were going to a third or what would become a fourth or fifth alarm. I think I had the last sixth alarm ever transmitted. I think I was acting as the, fifth alarm response. Both the chief of department and the chief of ops were out of town. And, a fire in Jamaica that went to sixth alarms. And after that, the commissioner said, we're not going to have any more fires that go beyond a fifth alarm, right? We had one night in the summer, a power outage on the west side. I don't know if you remember, I forget what year it was, but from, probably around the 60s or 70s all the way down south of Madison Square Garden.
1999?
1999, no, yes, no, I don't know.
This was
No,
affected
no,
Harlem,
no,
I know
no.
that, or is this later?
Right. I think it was probably 21 or 2.
Oh, yes. Okay, you're for I know what you're talking about. Yep,
the whole west side, right? And it was interesting how
Yep.
that proceeded, right? I was on the phone with Mike Quinn, who's now the rescue battalion commander. He was in the rescue battalion, and we were chatting about something, and then a couple boxes go out for elevator, stuck elevator emergencies, and then more boxes are going out, and then it's becoming clear that we've lost power in this several block area, and now another several block area. And it turned out to be about a 5 to 7 hour event. And it was really interesting to, how that was, how from a fire department perspective, we coordinate a response. We let the, Manhattan Dispatch take over, right? Like assigning units to these, right, multiple, I don't know how many, but in the hundreds of elevator emergencies and other emergencies. Chief Richardson, I think was chief of operations at the time, came in and became a multi-agency event. So that was a very interesting operation to see, a big multi-agency event and operation coordinated well with the PD. And of course, the mayor showed up for that. So number of incidents, and it was always what you look forward to, right? As right. Basically an office guy, get out in the field and, touch base with the members and go to fires again, maybe.
And the previous question, and Tyson, you've had some good ones tonight, and I appreciate them, is do you believe, he asked, your fire protection engineering background made you the ideal candidate for being the chief of fire prevention?
Well, I think in the mind of Chief Leonard, it did. I don't know if it did, right? It prepared me for certainly some parts of it, right? I had spent my life doing building and fire code consulting, so I knew, the history of a lot of what was in these codes weren't in the codes, right? The fires and different things that led to the regulations. But a lot of fire prevention is straight old business leadership, right? And and so I don't know if I was that guy, but you don't have a choice, right? You have to evolve, you have to grow, you have to make yourself understand. The crazy part of that is, as a rescue officer, right? I was a firefighter in rescue, a lieutenant in rescue ops, captain of rescue ops, chief of rescue ops. I hadn't done building inspection since 1985, right? So when you think
It's a
about
long time.
the dichotomy, I don't know what you call
Right.
it, whatever it is, right? It didn't make sense. Here's a guy who had done fire prevention in, almost 20 years, and you're putting him as the chief of fire prevention. But you know what it was? It was challenging. And my number two guy, so I got to work with two great individuals in terms of the executive staff on the third floor fire prevention. John Buckite, who, very intelligent, well, just a breadth of knowledge, wide breadth of knowledge. And then Kevin Brennan. We all agree it was very interesting. It was different. It was a challenge. Every day went by too fast. And I think we agreed that, and Kevin's still working. Kevin Brennan's in operations now. John's retired, but I think we all agreed that that was, maybe counterintuitive to most of the members on the executive staff. That was probably the most interesting, staff position, right? Bar maybe chief of operations or chief of department.
I can imagine. I can imagine. And again, to that point, over 30 years into your career, you're still learning different things and different components and still being challenged in a good way, in a way that was motivational and beneficial to your career. And certainly, of course, now, even in retirement, the things that you're speaking on, since you called it a career recently, that background, of course, was helpful too. Now, March of 2023, for reasons well documented, bit of a difficult time for the FDNY. A lot of things happened, and for those of you know what I'm talking about. If not, you can look it up and read up on it. You were demoted back to deputy chief, which, I mean, again, you've been a chief for this point by a long time. For a long time, I should say. And you knew how to be a chief. Nobody needed to teach you how to be an officer. You were a citywide tour commander at one point. It's not the best situation for reasons, again, well documented, but hey, you have to make the best of it. And during that time frame, the last couple of years there, you still have the support of the men and the women on the line. They respect you. They know your background. They know your pedigree. How did you make the best of that situation?
Yeah, it wasn't how I think there were three of us that were demoted. I think the inference was we were supposed to retire. We all
Yeah.
opted to forego that option and continue to work. We all went back to working as deputies in the field, and I thought it was a great opportunity to get back to the firehouse. Certainly, I had to, baseball player, right? You want to slow the game down,
Right.
Whether we New York Mets or Atlanta Braves, right? But I had to slow the game down, right? When I get back to the division, I didn't have a lot of administrative responsibilities, which is typical to the assigned chiefs in the division, the assigned deputies, because I wasn't assigned. I was covering chief, eventually get assigned in a covering capacity to Division 13. But because I had enough of leave accumulated over time, I would only work in the Queens divisions, the 13th or 14th, because I was taking the train in at that point, and that worked out well for me. And they were great. When I go back to the 13th division, the chiefs, the aides there, Danny Brown, the division commander George Healy, Bobby Spooth, Gene Toronto, and then they had some turnover in the 14th division at that time, so I did some long-term gigs there. Staffs were great. I didn't have a lot of, I mean, I go from, I don't know how many emails a day, 200 or 300 emails a day, to no administrative responsibility, which not a horrible thing, right?
Yeah.
But it was nice getting to, eat with the members, for lunch and dinner, to go visit the firehouses. I had a unique perspective to share with the members at the time, and then, getting to go a fire. So it was yeah, it was a silver lining, right? Into to your point, what was probably not a, great part of the career,
Yeah.
but still, it was a good thing.
Right. And you were able to land on your feet and go back to going to fires on a regular basis again. So, and again, not going too much into the situation, they tried to force your hand, but instead they gave you a lot of joy. Even if the situation itself didn't start out so great, they gave you actually a really, really nice opportunity without trying to. So, it's kind of a ha ha in that
And what
sense.
makes it, for me, going back as a deputy who now, I've lost skills, right?
Right.
Having, your staff chief, and yeah, you're the incident commander at these escalating multiple alarms or emergencies. But what makes it easy as the, incident commander, 2 or 3 star, is you have great leadership in the field, right?
Right.
From, the company officer, battalion, deputy level. So it's pretty, most times you're just kind of connecting dots and orchestrating a little bit, and you can rely on, the again, character and caliber of person, well trained and well disciplined and focused. And same thing as a deputy. I'm out there as a deputy now. I mean, I would walk up. I didn't have any what you call deputy chief fires where things really start to go awry.
Right.
So I'd stand next to, the battalion chief who's getting it done. And if you need anything, let me know and
Right.
make
Right.
a
Right.
couple of suggestions. And so, yeah, fortunate in that respect as well.
So brings us to last year, just shy of 40 years. Certain guys, even without all the craziness and chaos of 2023, certain guys aim for round numbers. You originally wanted to leave at 20. You left just shy of 40. What was it, again, that whole mess aside, that made you say, okay, you know what? This is a good time to leave. I've done everything I've wanted to do. I can't think of anything else I want to accomplish.
Yeah, well, I knew I was, I didn't want to age out necessarily. And they found some 9/11 related issues.
Hmm.
And when I was told, okay, you're going to be, put on a disability retirement, I had plenty of leave, right? And I could have gone longer, but a fella who was a 2 star in fire prevention who retired, and I probably shouldn't like him because he's part of the reason I was sort of shanghaied, if you will, to fire prevention. A fellow named Eddie Ferrier, well regarded chief, Battalion 4-4. I remember him, he chose to go 10/8 on 10/8, right? So October 8th, he selected his retirement date. And as you know, 10/8 fire department parlance is you're going in service, right?
Right.
And so, well, that just happens to be my birthday. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go 10/8 on my birthday. Which happens to be 10/8. So I could have gone into November. I had enough leave to get me there, but I said, I figure if I start to, enter some stage of dementia, if I can remember one thing, I can remember at least two things, right? So,
And congratulations to you. It's been a few months now. I know retirement's still pretty fresh because it just happened. But from what we were talking about off air, you certainly been keeping yourself very busy. It was a great career. You did a lot. You have a lot to be proud of. A lot of great people you were able to meet along the way, some of which are still with us, some of which, like we talked about earlier, the guys who were lost to 9/11, those who've been lost since are not, but their memories certainly live on. So before I get to the rapid fire, I guess the last thing I'll ask you is, when you look back, and I know it's still, again, new because it's only been a few months, when you have time to think about it on the days that you're not so busy running around doing all the things that you were talking about with me off air, how do you define almost 40 years of your life in a sentence or two, if you could?
well, rewarding. I mean, I'll throw out some terms. Certainly rewarding, challenging, supremely interesting, never a dull moment, professionally. Um, and yeah, fast, too fast, right? So, there was, I remember a fellow from the Uniform Firefighters Association addressing us in Proby School. Now we're wet, we're cold, we're tired, we're beat up, and wishing he was us, right? He's telling us, boy, I wish I was you, and getting to start my career over. I got to retire soon. You guys are the luckiest. Well, I get what he was saying that day, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a magic carpet ride. And one that hopefully I can be a part of soon. And I definitely, these conversations make me realize how fortunate I'll be, and I'll definitely cherish it when the time comes. It brings us into the rapid fire. Before we go into the rapid fire, it's going to be brought to you by our friend Vince over at Armor Tuff and Billy Ryan. We'll start with Vince.
Firehouse floors take a beating. Rigs rolling in, gear drop down, chemicals and spills every single day. That's why departments nationwide are choosing Armor Tuff. Armor Tuff epoxy floors are built for fire stations. Slip resistant, chemical resistant, easy to clean, and tough enough to handle anything the job throws at them. It's more than just a floor. It's a safer, sharper, and more professional foundation for your house. And here's the bonus. Armor Tuff is an authorized dealer for Groves. So if gear racks, PPE extractors, or dryers are what you're after, you'll find them here. Heavy discounts apply for Getting Salty listeners. So install an Armor Tuff floor and get Groves products at dealer cost. Armor Tuff, built for firefighters, built to last.
And of course, one more ad, and that's from the best PI I know, Billy Ryan.
The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast.
And like I said, the rapid fire, and I'll kind of switch up the verbiage of these questions, not the questions themselves, but I like going back, and this is in the, of course, the vein of the first question. I like going back and asking this, if time machines were real and you could hop in one and go back to a specific spot in your career across those nearly 40 years, where are you going back to tomorrow if you could?
The can position in Rescue 2.
Yeah, not a bad spot to go to. Yeah. During your time in rescue operations, second question, the biggest leadership lesson you learned from that particular chapter?
Is the value of a team, and the role of a leader doesn't have to be that the leader has to know everything, right? But rely on those that collectively can achieve the best outcome.
Mm-hmm. Third question, rapid fire, and you can expand on this if you want to, because it's not always a simple, straightforward answer with a question like this. The fire service has come a long way in terms of safety, but there's new hazards, right? Especially now, lithium-ion batteries have been a big thing in New York City recently. What do you feel the fire service as a whole, not just the FDNY, still needs to make changes, I should say, that still need to be made as it pertains to firefighter safety?
I don't know. There are wholesale changes I would recommend, but I think that the fire service, to your point, has to stay focused on the evolving change of its surroundings, right, and how to be best positioned to engage safely, effectively, and be protected in the process. Again, I think that, you look over the lifetime of my 40 years, geez, I was riding the back step, right? And I had 3/4 boots when I started. I don't know if anybody would have told you then that you have to have bunker gear and, you can't ride on the back step. But I think that the fire service, and the leadership of the fire service does a good job of trying to be proactive in recognizing challenges to firefighter safety. And I mean, you look and we did a look back in, I guess, 2021 of the 20 years since the Father's Day fire, since 9/11, as to where the FDNY had come in terms of firefighter safety. And it's amazing, right? The technology, how that's evolved, and how we were able to leverage that evolution to being able to, benefit firefighter accountability, right? From what used to be in the volunteer fire services, tags that firefighters would take off their turnout coat and put on the rig. And that's how you would know who was on the rig. To now we have, the electronic riding lists, We know on our handy talkies who's who's where. The FDNY back about the time I was acting chief of safety implemented the you can see mine is a terrible thing, but an incident command app, right?
Right.
That can track resources and also individuals in those resources assigned to ladders, trucks, rescues, and squads, and so forth. So I just think just keep looking ahead, right, and preparing for the next turn and what's around that turn.
Absolutely. Fourth question, the rapid fire. You touched on it a little bit. You can expand on it here. Hardest transition in your estimation: company officer to chief or field chief to bureau chief?
Yeah, for me personally, and I don't know if it's a universal, but as we said, from captain, company officer to battalion chief in my case, given my insulation, if you will, from an awareness, right, of at a fire, you know what they do, but beyond the fire ground, what is the role and how to act and when to act, and so to me that was the hardest. But again, the people we work with, they and who we work for, they want you to be successful, right? Your supervisors, they want you to succeed. There's nobody rooting for, bad outcomes or you to fail, right? So, I mean, again, the character and caliber of individuals I had the opportunity to spend my career with.
Absolutely. And the final question, the rapid fire. There's a lot of great patches to be worn in the fire service, that's for sure. But there are a few that bear more historical significance in the patch of the New York City Fire Department. When you reflect back, how fortunate do you feel to have gotten the can't speak. How fortunate do you feel to have gotten the opportunity to have worn that patch for, again, nearly 4 decades?
Oh, incredibly fortunate. I mean, it's what it's done for me, not only professionally, but personally and my family. Golly, just, I don't even know how to put into words
Right.
what it's meant. There's a passion to it, right? That many, I wouldn't say most, many of us have, especially, being members of the FDNY and having the opportunity to, be impactful in terms of the evolution and helping to innovate, moving it forward.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Thank you very much. Stick around. I'll talk to you off the air. Before I say my usual goodbyes to the audience, if you have any shout outs, Chief, the floor is yours. Go right ahead.
Well, and I thought there was going to be another rapid fire question about what does best of Bravest mean to you?
That I kind of tweaked it, to fit that. That
you
last
threw
question.
me a loop, my man.
Sorry about that.
Besides, let's go Mets. I'll say a belief every member of the FDNY should possess is they're the best of the bravest, right? Or their unit is the best unit of the bravest. And hopefully, our leadership still instills that mentality that regardless of what company you're in, that's the best company on the job.
That's a good way. That's to
And
cover
so
that
shout outs, what I'm kind of doing right now, a few things, some fire protection consulting, but I'm a board member of the First Responder Center for Excellence and still get to interact on a regular basis with our managing director, also known as Frank Lieb. I know you know Frank pretty well.
I certainly do.
He brings a lot of passion and energy to that effort, and goes back to your comment about what changes the fire service still needs to make around safety. Well, that organization is really helping to look around the corner, right, and helping our people prepare themselves and make themselves safe in many different facets. And working with a fellow I went to school with, volunteers in College Park. He was a journalism major, but we're doing a little project on leadership, and its origins come from my experience, right, being demoted and the toxic culture around the fire department leadership at the time, and the notion of toxic leadership and how individuals in that environment, providing some resources, tools, considerations for how to navigate such a situation. I have a master's in management, And we talked about leadership, management, leadership styles. We've learned all about positive forms of leadership, servant leadership, and transformational leadership and the like. But one thing we didn't talk about is this notion of toxic leadership, right? So we're going to explore that and hopefully, come up with some way to disseminate what we've learned and maybe some recommendations to benefit. And it's not only a fire service focus; it could be, any
Anywhere.
organization you can
Anywhere.
find yourself in any level of supervisory or leadership capacity, trying to navigate such a tough environment.
And I mean this with all sincerity. Should you ever want to come back on the program, which you're more than welcome to, if we want to just do a show on that, just from a general perspective, how that can affect any leadership organization, I'm happy to cover that because that's an imperative.
Well, hey, that's a possibility, right?
Yeah.
Cliff and I have talked about that could be one form, this among others, if not multiple, that this could take as an objective, right?
Mm-hmm. It's an important subject, again, across the board, not just limited to the fire service. So thank you. Like I said, stick around. We'll talk off air. Thanks to everybody that tuned in tonight, especially to those of you that contributed with questions. For those of you whose questions I didn't get to, I apologize. But thanks as always for submitting them. I appreciate you guys across the board from wherever you were watching, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Coming up next, we're hitting 400 episodes of this bad boy on Monday, which is hard to believe. I started this thing, like I said before, now wax poetic Monday, so I'll spare you the monologue now. Sitting on the corner of my bed with a tablet underneath my cell phone, recording interviews over the phone. And here we are almost, again, 399 episodes later, still going strong. We've evolved a lot. We've spoken to a lot of major names over the years, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish. And when I say we, that means all of you in the audience, certainly producer Victor and his contributions, and all the guests that have been nice enough to make the time. So who are we going to speak to for that episode? He's currently a deputy chief for the Hoboken Fire Department, friend of mine. And I look forward to chronicling his career. Big time content creator for the fire service these days, with real time content of his experiences on the fire ground for what is a busy job over there in Hoboken, New Jersey. Deputy Chief Joe Grossi for Best of the Bravest Nationwide edition will be here for that episode. Again, 400, we'll mark it together. Then it'll be a nice time. For those of you in the meantime listening on the audio side from his 1996 self-titled debut album, Duncan Sheik, well, Duncan Sheik is going to play us out tonight with Barely Breathing. In the meantime, on behalf of retired FDNY Deputy Chief Joe Jardin and producer Victor, and of course all of you in the audience, I'm Mike Colón. We'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.